Welcome to the Evidential Faith Podcast, where a father-son duo explore the scientific, historical, and philosophical evidence for the God of the Bible. The goal of this podcast is to encourage believers and challenge skeptics to consider the reliability of Jesus in the Bible. What is up, podcast listeners? Welcome back to the Evidential Faith Podcast. My name is Jake Nash. With me, as always, is my dad and my co-host, Troy Nash. And today, we are going to talk about another hard-hitting question, the question of, did God command genocide? This is a question that a lot of people discuss, a lot of people raise objections to. They call God a moral monster for commanding the Israelites to kill the Canaanites. And we're going to talk about it and see if God truly is evil for commanding the Israelites to drive out the people of Canaan. So without further ado, we're going to jump into it. And Dad, I'll let you take it from here.
So yeah, this is a tough topic. This is one that whole books have been written about. So we'll at the end we'll mention some good books people can look at to further their knowledge in this topic, because we're just going to really kind of scratch the surface here. So, like many atheists and skeptics will say things like, how come God doesn't prevent evil? And then when God does destroy evil, like in the case of the Canaanites, these same people will say that God is evil, vindictive, immoral, and guilty of genocide, right? So we're going to take a look at this. So why would a loving God order the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites? So first we have to kind of, take a step back and look at, if there is no God, then why would killing anyone or any group of people be wrong? What is the moral standard by which an atheist could justify that it's wrong to kill someone or a group of people? If there is no God, then humans have no more valuable than an insect. Thus their lives have no intrinsic value. So killing them really is meaningless. But if there is a loving God, then why would he order the killing of a group of people like the Canaanites? So we have to take a step back and kind of look at the history of what's going on in that region and what is Canaan and who are the Canaanites. So Canaan is an ancient region of land which includes parts of modern-day Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel. Within this land were several tribes or people groups, such as the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, and a group called the Anakim, which were said to be descendants of giants called Nephilim. God had promised this land to Abraham and his descendants in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. But he said that he has to wait because the sins of Canaan have not yet reached their full measure. So here we see God displaying patience to the Canaanites to repent of their sinful ways. He wants them to turn from their evil deeds that they're doing, but they don't.
Right.
So right around this same time is a 7-year famine that takes place, and the Israelites are forced to go to Egypt where they can find food. During that time, the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites, and for 400 years they are under the slavery of the Egyptians. This is when God uses Moses, and we see this in Exodus. God uses Moses to free the Israelites and deliver them to this promised land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. God commands the Israelites to kill the Canaanites, but they disobey God because they were afraid of the mighty warriors of Canaan. So the Israelites had sent out a couple of scouts to look to see what this land was all about and who was in it. And they came back and reported that there were mighty warriors there, and there were these giant people. They described themselves as grasshoppers compared to them. And so they were afraid. They disobeyed God's orders, and even though God had told them that they would be victorious, so God curses the Israelites, and for 40 years they wander around in the wilderness, just complaining that they want to go back into slavery in Egypt. So this goes on until a new generation of Israelites is born and is willing to obey God's commands and go in and wipe out the Canaanites and deliver this land to the Israelites. So God is using the Israelites to punish the Canaanites for their wicked sins. And from Leviticus chapter 18, we see that the sins of Canaan, which includes child sacrifice, they were sacrificing their children to the Ammonite god called Molech. This description comes from gotquestions.org, and it says that Molech worship was practiced by the Ammonites and Canaanites, who revered Molech as a protecting father figure. Images of Molech were made of bronze, and their outstretched arms were heated until red hot, and then living children were placed on this idol's arms until they were dead, and then they were rolled into a fire pit below. Some sources indicate that a child might also be passed through fire prior to actual sacrifice in order to purify or baptize the child. So Molech worship occurred in what's called the Hinnom Valley near Jerusalem. And because of this, that valley became associated with the idea of Tophet, or hell. So this valley was called hell. And there is archaeological evidence where they have found, bones of children that are, in piles of bones in this area.
Yeah, these people are burning their children alive.
Yeah, they're literally burning their children.
Yeah.
So is other sins that the Canaanites included things like incest and bestiality and homosexuality. And it's important, again, to understand that God has given them more than 400 years to change their ways. But it is so appalling to God that he orders, the Israelites to go in and destroy the Canaanites. So is God commanding the Israelites to commit genocide? And in this case, no. Genocide is the killing of a group of people because of their ethnicity.
Yeah.
So this is not what God is doing. God is literally, he's essentially handing down a capital punishment for a group of wicked, evil people that have been committing these vile acts for a very long time. And this is God's right as the ultimate judge of the world.
Right.
He's judging these people, and this is his punishment to those people, is to kill them, right? To use the Israelites to not only kill them, but then to deliver this land to the Israelites. But we also see that there are some cases where, in the case of Rahab, for example, who was a Canaanite prostitute, her life was spared along with her family's because of her faith in the God of Israel and for helping the Israelites by hiding their spies. This helped Israelites conquer the city of Jericho, which was a strong fortified city within the land of Canaan. And Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, is a direct descendant of Rahab. So we see that her life was spared along with her family's because she trusted in God and believed in and had faith in God. So literally no person had to die in this case. God's desire is that the wicked turn from their sin rather than perish. And we see this in Ezekiel 18:31 through 32. And in chapter 33, verses 11. So remember, God gave the Canaanites 400 years or more to turn from their wicked ways. He did not want them to die.
Yeah,
but he ultimately...
His heart is that all come to repentance and not one would perish, but that's just not the case. It kind of reminds me of when Abraham is talking to God about Sodom and Gomorrah, very similar situation. God chooses to strike down. In this case, he does it. He rains fire from hell, which is a whole other thing about, like, there are literally sulfur balls that if you light them on fire, they just burn. Like, there's sulfur balls all over modern day Sodom and Gomorrah, which there's nothing there anymore. But that's a whole nother issue. But what I was getting at is that during this time, Abraham is pleading with God and saying, God, you're going to wipe out all of Sodom? What if you find 50 righteous people? And God says, yeah, I won't do it for 50 righteous people. I will spare them. Like, what about 40? What about 30, 20, 10? What about 10 righteous people? If you find 10 righteous people, will you kill everyone? And God says, no, I won't. But he's unable to find any righteous person there. And at the same time, the only people that are righteous is Lot, who is in Sodom, and he tells Lot to get out. So it's very similar to Rahab, where the righteous people, the people with faith in God, are spared in this situation, and the people that are judged are rightly judged. They're burning their children alive. They're raping women and children. They're having sex with animals and committing incest and all the things that we say are detestable. So God is judging them. That's what he's doing. It's not genocide because of their ethnicity. It's judgment based on their actions.
Right, exactly. So if God is the creator of all things, then he is the ultimate judge of all things and all people. And he can take the life of anyone or any group at any time that he sees fit. People may think that that's harsh and hard, I mean, as you just pointed out, nobody had to die in this case. So anyway, God is handing down his justice. And we as humans play God all the time. When we wage war against a group we determine to be evil to protect a greater society, we are essentially playing God.
Yeah.
Humans play God when they decide to murder, which is the deliberate taking of an innocent life, and such as abortion. Many people will say that this is murder. Approximately 73 million times per year, humans play God by taking the life of an unborn child, and then call it a woman's right to choose. But when God determines that a society or group of people are so evil that they need to be destroyed, then he's called evil, immoral, and unloving.
Mm-hmm.
So we see that in this case, that what God does sometimes is harsh, but it's ultimately his judgment. He is the judge, and this is why people need to understand that sin to God is incredibly sin to a holy God is detestable. I mean,
yeah.
In the case of this, we don't see this as genocide. We see it as God ultimately passing judgment on the Canaanites.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, as it goes on, there are other arguments why this isn't a case of genocide, and we'll look at some of those other ones here. So if you want to take that, Jake.
Yeah. So kind of as you alluded to, we know that God judged the Canaanites. We know why he judged the Canaanites and why it's justified for him to do so, because God is incapable of murder. He's the creator of life, like you said, and so he has the right to take life as well. But there's other, if that's not satisfactory enough for you, there's other arguments against the claim that God commanded genocide, and we're gonna look at this from a literary perspective of what the Bible actually says. So many times in the Old Testament where God commands the destruction of a people, such as the Canaanites, there is a level of hyperbole used to drive home a point. And we know this because the Bible describes the complete destruction of a people group, and then a few chapters later, those same people are still around. So obviously they weren't completely wiped out. Like, for example, in Joshua 10 and 11, Joshua's conquest of the Canaanites is described using language such as left no survivors, put all to the sword, destroyed all who breathe, suggesting complete destruction and conquest with no survivors. But a few chapters later, in Joshua 13, verse 1, Joshua says there remains much land to be possessed. And a few chapters after that, in chapters 15 through 19, we see major Canaanite strongholds still filled with people. So clearly, they weren't all wiped out in Joshua 10 and 11. It's hyperbole. There were people that were wiped out, and I think you made that argument from a justice standpoint. But there's also this hyperbolic argument from a literary standpoint, that destruction doesn't always necessarily mean that everybody died. So what does this prove? Well, in the ancient Near East, total destruction war language was often exaggerated on purpose. This was a normal military rhetoric of the time. We can look at things outside the Bible, like the Moabite stone and Egyptian military inscriptions, for example. They use very similar language. We actually looked at an inscription in an episode last season to prove a different point, but it's called the Tel Dan Stele, and we looked at this last season to show a mention of King David. But on this stele, it says that this king of Aram Damascus conquered the house of David, aka Israel, and completely desolated their land. But we know that Israel is still around. I mean, Jesus was from Israel, and obviously so is David, and Israel's around today. So it can't be completely decimated. It's clearly hyperbole, and the Bible uses the same style. Phrases like utterly destroy, leave alive nothing that breathes, wipe them out completely, all men, women, and children. They're often battle idioms, not literal descriptions of killing every last living person. And ancient readers understood these terms. It's similar how we would understand things like, man, the Broncos murdered the Chiefs on Sunday. Or, did you see the game last night? The Rockies crushed the Dodgers. Now, the last one's clearly made up, clearly false, but you understand the point, right? The language is hyperbolic, and it is aligned with common cultural convention of the time. It's similar to how God uses metaphors or poetry or parables elsewhere in the Bible. He communicates in human language forms that we can understand.
Mm-hmm.
So on top of hyperbolic language, there's another literary argument that sheds some light on these events, and this is from Dr. Michael Heiser. He's the one that I found this from, but we really dive a little bit into the original Hebrew in these texts. So when God commands Israel to conquer Canaan, there are verbs used that aren't always associated with killing. For example, the word garash means to drive out, and that is used in Exodus 23. And that's used in Exodus 23, verses 28 through 31, Exodus 33, verse 2, Deuteronomy 33, 27, Joshua 24, 12, and verse 18. Another one is the word yara, which means to dispossess or similarly drive out, which is used in Exodus 34, 24, Numbers 21, 32, Numbers 33, 52 through 55, Joshua 3, 10, Joshua 12, 1, Joshua 13, 6, Joshua 23, 5, and 9. In all these cases, these words meaning drive out or dispossess are not used to say kill. And it's a fallacy to claim that the Canaanite conquest was only about taking life. Now, there are verbs used in specific times during the Canaanite conquest that refer to killing. But Michael Heiser points out that in these cases, they're only used where the Anakim, aka the Amorite, Rephaim giant clans, were located. Only in the areas where those people were located. And again, this isn't about their ethnicity, it's about their actions and what those people were known for. So the word harem, which means to kill, is used in Numbers 13, 28 through 29. And it's only described as killing the so-called hill country, which includes the hills of Galilee, Samaria, and Judah, all places where the Anakim or sons of Anak were located. Similarly, the word shamad, which means to kill or destroy, is used in Joshua 9, verse 24, Joshua 11, 14 through 20, and Joshua 24, verse 8. And we only see this verb used to refer to the hill country where the Anakim are located. So why does this matter? Well, the killing wasn't ever random or widespread, this ethnic cleansing. It was directed only at the sons of Anak. This is why when Joshua recounts his victory of the conquest, Joshua was the one after Moses who God commanded to go in and lead the Israelites to take over Canaan, to take over and drive out these people from the promised land. That was Joshua. When he recounts his victory in the conquest in Joshua 11, 21 through 23, he states, there are no more Anakim in the land. Not there are no more Canaanites. He says there's no more sons of Anak, not no more Canaanites, just those people. And God promised the land of Canaan and commanded them to rid the land of the evil inhabitants. Most of the people in the land, a lot of them, could just be driven out or even given the opportunity to become part of Israel, like Rahab, for example. But the descendants of Anak were different. They had a history going all the way back to the flood of opposing God's chosen people in very evil and vile ways. In this specific case, God knew it was kill or be killed. If the Israelites did not kill the sons of Anak would kill them. Mm-hmm. There was no bargaining with Anakim. So God chose to use Israel to get rid of them, which is his right as God.
Yeah.
But this wasn't genocide. It was judgment on and protection from a specific group of people, not the Canaanites as a whole, the Anakim specifically. And so there's kind of one more thing I wanted to touch on, because I know that even at this point, there are people saying, okay, the Canaanites may have been evil, and yeah, there's hyperbolic language used, and maybe not all the time when they talk about destruction is people being killed. But God still killed some innocent people. He still killed some women and children, and that's wrong. And that's fair. You know, it's a hard thing to get at. But if that's you asking that question, I want to ask you a question. Again, why is it wrong for God to kill? The Bible describes God as the holy, perfect, righteous, just creator of life. And that means two things. One, everything God does is good and right, even if we disagree. Two, God has the right to kill anyone because he creates life. In fact, at some point, he will kill all of us in one way or another. God gives life and God takes it away. I think the whole point of this gets to this fallacy, this this notion that we deserve our time on earth, but we don't. We're not inherently good people. We are, the only reason that we're alive is through God's mercy. Every day you wake up, every breath you take is a gift from God in his mercy. You don't deserve it. You did nothing to deserve the life that you have, and yet God gave it to you. The other thing is that we think that death is the worst possible outcome. But the Bible disagrees. It says that death followed by eternal separation from God, aka hell, is the worst possible outcome. Were men, women, and children killed at the hands of God in the Bible? Yeah, sometimes. And that's hard to grasp. But that doesn't mean that every one of those people were sent to hell. The evil ones definitely were, but not all of them. And let me give you an example from the Bible. In 2 Samuel, we read about King David's affair with Bathsheba and his murder of her husband Uriah. He sees this beautiful woman on top of this building, and he says, I want her, and he has an affair with her and then has her husband killed. This King David, called the man after God's own heart. So during this affair, David gets Bathsheba pregnant. And in 2 Samuel 12:14, we read that God chose to take the life of David's son as punishment for David's sin. And you could say, well, why does God get to do that? Again, because he's God. He gets to make that choice. Now, David's son did nothing wrong, and yet he lost his life because of his father's sin. But remember, death is not the end in the Bible. And just a few verses later in 2 Samuel 12:23, after David repents of his sin, he says he looks forward to the day that he can go to be with his son in heaven. So even though God took the life of his son, David believes his son is in heaven. And I believe that the babies that are aborted or horrible, the children that were killed at the hands of the worship of Molech are in heaven with Jesus. And just because they died in that way, or if God chose to take their life, that doesn't mean that they're in hell. Death is not the end. It just transports you to one of two places. And I mean, even today, we know that other people's sins can have huge consequences on our life. But that doesn't mean God judges us for the sins of others. I mean, forgive me for this morbid example, but let's say you're driving down the road and out of nowhere a drunk driver runs a red light, T-bones your car, and you die. You didn't do anything to deserve that. It was the other person who sinned and got behind a wheel inebriated, yet you were killed. But if you place your faith in Jesus, you'll spend eternity with him. And that's the best thing that you could ask for. So it's hard to wrap our mind around because we can't see the eternal side of things. Mm-hmm. But death isn't the end. It's not the end all be all. And that's the beauty about the gospel, is that if Jesus has overcome death and really rose from the dead, which the historical evidence is that he did, then you will too, if you put your faith and trust in Jesus.
If you have Jesus, death shouldn't be scary. But if you don't, it should be terrifying.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, I know this is a tough topic. I know there's going to be people that aren't happy with our response. There always is. But if you read in context, you understand the literary devices used in the ancient literature, you'll see God's heart and how he can perfectly balance justice and mercy. And that's our hope with all this.
Yeah. Again, we're just trying to open people's eyes and get them interested in at least taking a look at things for themselves. You know, there's some really good resources out there. Paul Copan has some really good books on this subject. Is God a Moral Monster? He has a new one out. I think it's called something like Is God a Vindictive Bully?
Yep.
Yeah. So he's done a lot of work on this. There's others as well. You mentioned Dr. Heiser and others. So there's plenty of resources out there for people to dive into it. And, you know, the important thing is when you're reading the Bible, you know, you read a verse, it just sounds like, what the heck? You've got to look at the context of what's going on at the time. Who the people are, why was God doing this? You know, what was happening? You can't just take a verse, cherry pick it, and, you know, throw your hands up in there and say, you know, I can't trust the Bible. I can't believe the Bible because because of this particular passage. And people do that all the time. They take them out of context and use it against Christianity or use it against God. And you know, it's unfair. So that's really all we're trying to point out in these cases. So,
So, well, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Share it with a friend. We really appreciate listening to the long form of these conversations. I know a lot of people just watch our reels and our TikToks and whatnot, and don't get the full story. And so if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Share it with a friend. Comment, leave a like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.